Why are so many adult children exhausted before they become caregivers? I think this is a core question that we truly need to answer. And the answer is actually kind of simple, gross, but simple. They are carrying the weight of three different generations all at the same time. And I think it's important that we pause here and actually define how I am using the concept of sandwich generation. There are a lot of people who define the sandwich generation as those who have kids and those who have aging parents. And those aging parents and having kids create the sandwich generation. I don't quite agree. I believe that there is a subset of the population that is carrying aging parents, their own life, but they still have people at home who need them. So whether I'm talking about a third grader or an adult autistic child who still relies on you to help walk them through all of the basics of the thought processes you need in order to live a life, that creates that mental load that actually creates the sandwich. In order to have a sandwich, you have to have a piece of bread, you have to have the innards, and then you have to have another piece of bread. You cannot have a sandwich generation if the children have already left and grown into independent adults. That is no longer a sandwich. So I define it as having mental load required to help manage two different generations, not including yourself. I believe this generation is very different from generations before for a couple of different reasons. Number one, in past generations, there typically was somebody who was not having to work outside of the home. They stayed home, they were able to help manage the children, and they were able to have some free time to be able to provide care to the aging parents while still managing a very full household. I grew up in a family like this. My mother did not work, my grandmothers did not work outside of the home. And so they were able to manage the mental and physical load working at the house instead. We no longer live in a society that can afford to have very many homemakers anymore. We have a lot of people who would like to do that, but most of us cannot afford that. We in our family cannot afford for one of us to be a stay-at-home parent. My husband works from home, but that doesn't mean that he actually is a homemaker. He has a job that he works from home. That creates a different dynamic than we have seen since post-World War I and World War II in families. It has changed the way that we have lived, and most of us have never seen an example of how this actually works in a two-income household where the children are constantly busy, and now we're adding in parents who have actually quite high expectations of what their retirement years are going to look like. Because you have these three generations that all have a lot of needs all at the same time, this can be very overwhelming. We hear a lot of discussion about the invisible workload that a lot of families have, or at least one person in each family has. They're keeping track of all the appointments and what needs to be purchased for school supplies, and whether or not they've ordered this medication for their child, plus their parents. And now we're adding in their parents' appointments and medications, and this just creates a huge additional load. One of the things that I was talking with a client a couple of months ago about was that she was noticing that it had been a very long time since someone had cleaned her parents' toilet. So we're not just talking about the things like medications and taking people to appointments. We're actually talking about the mental load of when was the last time was the toilet cleaned. That actually can take up a lot of space in your mind when you are now thinking about two different households and maintaining not just the food and the appointments and the medications, but also the cleanliness and the laundry of two different households. As I talked about in the last video, there is a mental tab that stays open for some of the biggest physical risks that our children face, whether it's diabetes or another medical condition, that tab cannot ever close. It has to constantly be running up in the forefront of our mind. When you now add on additional people to your household, such as your aging parents, there are conditions that are constantly running that have to keep an additional tab open. One of the big ones is dementia or Alzheimer's. Mental problems or mental memory problems can create a whole new worry that you are now carrying all of the time. These worries occupy space and are eating up memory, just like they do in a computer when you have 1,000 windows open, that decrease your capacity to be able to do your daily work in your job or in your daily life. You're going to start forgetting things. You cannot have that many windows open and remember everything that needs to be done. Many times I see the default person in a family being the person who appears to have the most capacity. Notice I did not say actually has the most capacity. It is just an appearance of having the most capacity. In our home, this is my husband, Greg, who works from home. So he has more face time with the other people in our home that need him, which creates a default of we're going to go to dad because he is right here and I can see him through the French doors. That type of default person never volunteers for this. They very well could have just as much, if not more, on their plate than the person leaving the home to be able to work outside the home. And that can create a lot of conflict because you're just the default. When you are taking over your parents' needs, in addition to your needs and your household needs and your children's needs, you now have an overwhelming amount of tabs open that really decreases your ability to be able to function in regular life. This creates an uneven distribution in your family, whether it is between spouses or it is between siblings across states, across countries. It can create a disproportionate and uneven understanding of what needs to be done and what actually is happening. If you live across country from your sibling and you are saying this is going on with mom, they may not believe you because they only see them once or twice a year for a couple of days. They are not seeing the day-to-day grind. But because you have that face time with them, you are becoming the person who now sees and absorbs the responsibility because your sibling that lives 12 states over isn't going to see the same thing because they don't have that face-to-face contact as often as you do. This is why that default person becomes the safety net for the entire family. They start fixing things, which delays the recognition of siblings who live far away, or they start intervening in ways that help make it appear that things are going better than they are. You also can have a spouse that does this. You can see this in married couples who've been married for 50 plus years, where if you actually get in and dig in, the dad is not okay, but mom compensates for him in a way that prevents the kids from being able to see that there are significant problems, and she is running at full capacity. So there is always someone who is picking up the slack. It just depends on where in the family that person falls. And when they become the safety net, we do not see the problems before they are catastrophic. And once we see them, typically there's two people involved, not just one. Carrying this burden costs a lot. It costs you emotionally, physically, spiritually, and not a lot of people recognize that load that the person is carrying because we have been conditioned to hide it from other people. We don't want people to see how hard it is. We want people to think that we're doing great. And sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. But the expectation is the same, that we're Instagram perfect, that everything is going the way that it should. And that's rarely the case. When you are carrying this burden and you are putting on this front of everything is fine, I'm good, we've got this, it's not a big deal, whether you are the spouse of the person who is failing or the child of the person who is failing, what ends up happening is that there is a lot of resentment behind that. There's a lot of frustration of how come nobody else can see this? Why am I the only person who is seeing this? And there can be anger that underlies that, which can create conflict within the family structure. There also can be conflict around nothing's wrong, everything's fine. And I see that a lot in older married couples who have been together for a long time, where one spouse is declining rapidly to the point that other people in the family are starting to pick it up. But the other spouse is adamant, everything's fine, stop bugging us, because they see it as a personal failure if you are able to see that anything is wrong. Probably because they have spent decades trying to smooth over the image that they are presenting to you as their family, that everything is fine within this family unit. So those relationships suffer. And the person who has been carrying it alone becomes exhausted. And at some point, they physically or mentally are not able to maintain the load anymore. And that can be incredibly terrifying and really sad, because then you don't just have one person that fails, you have two. I've encountered this many times in my business where everybody thought everything was okay until mom had a heart attack, and they had no idea how much she was compensating for dad. She doesn't want to stay in the hospital any longer because dad wanders at night, which is a surprise to everybody. And that's where we really see the problem starting to come, is when the caregiver, who nobody knew was really caregiving, starts to fail, and then the whole family unit collapses. That's the emergency that I'm talking about. That if you don't have a system that can be set and forget, it lands on you, of course, always at the worst time in your job, so that you are mentally not able to do what you need to do at work. You're also not able to take care of the problem, and now you have children that are also needing you. It's kind of a mess in that situation. The sad part is that most families just have made the assumption and resigned themselves to the fact that this is how it works. But it doesn't have to. In the same way that we don't approach our children's school years without a plan, we can approach the aging process with a structure, with a plan, so that things are truly set it and forget it and making minor tweaks as we go. Life doesn't have to feel like this. It doesn't have to be full of conflict, but it does cost you. It costs you in having to take the moment to stop and prepare for what comes next. In the same way that July and August, it can be really heavy, really financially heavy, really emotionally heavy as you are trying to get things together. It can cost you to stop and slow down and create a plan for your aging adults. It costs you some tough conversations. The dinner table can become a very difficult place to be in this season, because you need to have some tough conversations. We have been practicing for years having tough conversations with our children. So even our 10-year-old can tell you what our plan is for after retirement and how we want to live our life. The earlier you start these conversations that are tough, the more they become just a part of the conversations that you have around the dinner table, the easier they are, because they are not high stakes conversations anymore. High stakes conversations mean that you have never had this conversation and we have to sit down and fix it right now. But when it is a slow evolution of logical conversations that are part of the relationship that you're having with your family, these conversations don't have to be scary. They do not have to take a huge mental load. And so I am passionate about not just helping people in the sandwich generation to help take care of their aging parents, but also about teaching the sandwich generation, how do I prevent this exact crisis from happening when I am aging, so that my children and I can have a solid relationship, and this can just be a part of what we talk about at the dinner table, and we can work together to create a solid plan that makes me feel like I am a part of the family and does not create undue burden for my children. When you start super early and you start coming to grips with the fact that you will not live forever and that this body will not last forever, and you have those conversations with your children throughout their growing up life, suddenly everything feels so much lighter. Nothing is a secret. You're not hiding things. You're not hiding finances. You're not hiding your wishes should something catastrophic happen to you. Instead, it becomes something where you are able to collaborate together and create a life that is interwoven with your children and with the actual life cycle. And that is such a gift.